Thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll give everybody a minute or so to log in and get comfortable, and we'll go ahead and begin the fireside chat. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you for joining us today for our Black Futures Month. Just want to go over a few housekeeping rules with everyone. Just to remind everybody, the webinar is being recorded. Microphones and videos will be turned off for the presentation. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to email myself, Raina Whitted at cnhed.org. I'll drop my email in the chat. Just a reminder, the hosts and the panelists may be working from home, so if you can excuse any background noises that you may hear. We're going to try and do a quick Q&A segment after the panel's presentation. So as a reminder, just place your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll go ahead and moderate those for you today. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn the webinar over to our President and CEO, Stephen Glaudet.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our monthly meeting, Black History Month. We are doing a little bit of a variation on a theme. We decided that we wanted to change this from our historical look backwards to what we're calling Black Futures Month. And going forward, we're going to look at issues that frame, the future of challenges and opportunities that the Black community has. We also want to encourage you to not dismiss or distract from the traditional views of looking at Black history. There are a lot of organizations that are doing events and activities that share our rich history, and we ask you to connect and pay attention to them. So we are going to start our fireside chat by having me introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Masai Durbe. She is the Program Director for Wake Up's Enterprising Women of Color program, where she leads a U.S. Department of Commerce's Minority Business Development Agency funded initiative focusing on assisting women entrepreneurs of colors to build their businesses, secure contracts and capital, and increase partnership opportunities. And I'll let her tell you more things about her when she's introduced. We also have Brian McClure, who is the Director of the Council of Racial Equity, or CORE. Prior to joining CORE, Brian served in several leadership capacities for Council Member Kenya McDuffie and the Council's Committee on Business and Economic Development. We also have Donnie Crawford, who is a Senior Policy Analyst at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, a nonprofit organization that promotes policy and budget choices that address DC's racial and economic inequities. There are more things about each of these leaders' backgrounds, but again, I'm going to have them share. So this is a fireside chat, and we want it to be that way. I want to kind of frame it a little bit. I had the opportunity of leading very young in life, and even though it was a long, long time ago, I remember some of the challenges as well as some of the opportunities. And I would like to, as I shared with the panelists before we were starting, I'd like to think that the avenues and the lanes for young African Americans to lead has widened, but I also know that it has changed. And as we are putting more, I think, demands on young African American leaders to lead, because our understanding of the challenges around racial equity and racial inclusion and disparities I think that the challenges of leading are very different. So we're going to get started, and we should be joined with a fourth panelist. I know he may have had some trouble signing in. Shanar Little, he is the Chief Executive Officer of Fog Hill Inc., a commercial facilities maintenance firm headquartered in Washington, D.C. And I see Shanar is joining us now. Shanar, are you on a work site as I predicted you might be? You're muted, Shanar.
My fault. Nah, I just got in the house.
Okay, your background's a little fuzzy. See if you can clean it up. So let's get started. I have some questions we're going to ask the panelists. I'm going to encourage them to respond and also encourage them to react to each other's say. So, Donnie, we're going to start with you. And this is a simple question. I told you these would be softballs. So I'd love for you to hear, for us to hear, how you define leadership.
And just so you all know, Steve did not give us the questions ahead of time. So
it was intentional.
Hi, everyone. I'm Donnie. Leadership's really interesting to me. I feel like a lot of people think about hard skills, both when it comes to hiring and also when it comes to leadership. But when I look at leaders that I admire, it's really the soft skills for me. It's being able to read the room. It's being able to be supportive to people who are working under you, being able to foster a positive and inclusive work culture. So for me, I really value the soft skills and just people who are like people, so to say, who are really looking to both make their impact in the work that they do every day, but also mentor and groom everyone who's coming up after them. That's really important for me. That's what I look for, and that's what I hope that I'm able to provide in the people that I supervise.
I think that's a great answer. I may want to circle back to you about reading the room, because I do think that that is an important quality. It has accelerated some careers and it has derailed others.
Oh, you were muted, so I don't know. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Brian, how do you define leadership?
Yeah, and thanks again, Steve, and for I think Raina who was on earlier for the invitation to come and speak. And I see Yvette Banfield just dropped something in the chat. I'm very honored to be here today. Again, I'm Brian McClure, for those of you who I may not have had the pleasure of meeting yet. And one of the ways that I define leadership is just looking at those who have come before me that have actually had the opportunity to be in positions to help mold others. So one of the things that I always think about, like I grew up as a preacher's kid, and my dad actually, to me, was the ultimate embodiment of a leader. And one of the attributes that always stood out to me was his ability to take on the problems of others to make their burdens a little lighter. And so when Donnie talked about being able to read the room, that resonated with me, but maybe for a different reason. And I would define even like reading the room as the ability to see who needs what resources do people have, what resources do, or what emotional and like physical needs do people have, and how can we respond to it? And true leadership, to me, is being able to identify that and respond to it, even when people may not know what it is that they need. And so I also look at people like my mom, who has sacrificed so much, and my mother, who raised 4 boys, worked full time, and always gave more of herself than what she asked. And so to me, when I think about leadership, it's also thinking about what are we putting into others.
Taking on the burden of others. You know, that's another circle back. I've always been intrigued by someone who is young actually being able to do that. That is an underscore along with reading the room. Masai, how do you define leadership?
I like how we're starting with the softball questions, right? Just how do you define leadership? So I think for me, it's actually changed a bit since I took on a leadership role. And I think I'm understanding a lot more how much more of a role emotional intelligence actually plays in being a leader. Because I think a lot of it is immediately understanding that because you're a leader, that doesn't mean you're going to do everything. It actually means being hyper aware of the people around you, what their skills are, what their hopes are, not just what their skills are, but really what their hopes and dreams are and where they're trying to go, and figuring out how you help them get there. So not just how you figure out what they need to do to help you get where you're going, but sincerely trying to figure out how do you help them get to where they're going. And I think that's really how you get the best out of people, by really genuinely caring about them as human beings and not just the people that you're leading. And I'm realizing how much more important that is than I would have thought before I was in a leadership position. And I think going through the last couple of years with COVID as well, and how much that has changed the way we all approach work, those parts have become so much more important than they were before. I think they were always important, and we've sort of failed by not putting them at the very top of what it means to be a leader, caring for other people. But now, after COVID and how hard the last few years have been, being able to respond to people's needs in that way has become more important than ever.
That's an amazing point. And I will tell you that, from my lens, COVID tested, whether young or old, our leadership in so many unforeseen ways. I think a lot of amazing things have emerged about leadership because of the pandemic and all those shifting dynamics that you described. Shinar, how do you define leadership?
So first of all, I'll say hello to everyone. And also, I think that it's hard to go behind everybody what everyone else has said. Sacrifice, putting others before yourself and being able to read the room. I think all of those are very good qualities. The only thing I would add to that would be managing the different personalities that you are working with. You have to understand how to work with people and understand, how to work with them. Because, at the end of the day, you have your end goal that you are looking to accomplish, or the objective or the mission, however you want to, specify it. And you have to understand how these folks can help. How do you manage your personalities to be able to help get to the mission? Because a lot of times you can get caught up in so much of things that don't even help or assist in the situation. So that's what I would say.
So this is great. I wish I could say that was the last of the softball questions, but it's not. But I just want to pause and say to the audience, this is a great quick snapshot that we are in good hands going forward with the leadership that is emerging within our community, and that the leadership that we are all trying to help cultivate. So thanks each of you for that. So the second question was a softball question, so I'm gonna skip to one. When did you first realize that you were going to be a leader? And Shinar, since you complained about going last, I'm gonna let you go first.
When did I first realize that I wanted to be a leader? Is that the question? You're on mute.
That you were going to be a leader. So there's a difference between wanting to be and going to be.
Okay. All right.
There's some people who want to be leaders that never are, and there's some people who never want to be leaders who are. So when did you realize that you were going to be a leader?
Mine is interesting, Steve, because honestly, I realized it at a very young age. I can really start from incentivizing I'm the oldest of 5, so I remember incentivizing, my siblings to do chores around the house for me. So, so it can start as young as that. But I think as a professional, I realized that that I was going to be a leader when I realized that I had the capacity to really grow my team and really have my team buy into my vision.
Great. Donnie, when did you realize you were going to be a leader?
I think I definitely fell in that second category that you were talking about, Steve, where I didn't think I was going to, and it just happened naturally. Similar to what Shanar said, I'm the oldest, so that was easy to do with my brothers. Like, I was definitely a leader growing up, but once I entered the workforce, I'm more introverted. And so one of my strongest skills is deep listening. And that's what I did at my prior job. And then naturally, just by listening and thinking about how to make improvements on the job, I began to like find my voice a little bit more. And when I did make recommendations, they were received well. And so I became more confident in being a leader. And I think it just happened naturally. It wasn't something I wanted to be, but it's definitely something that I've carried on in my new roles.
That resonates. Masai, when did you realize you were going to be a leader?
Yeah. Actually, what Donnie just said really resonates with me. I still don't think of myself as a leader. I think I happen to be in a leadership position, but I don't think of myself that way. I think, like Donnie said, there's something about kind of going through your professional career and finding opportunities where it turns out, oh, my instincts were right about these things, and they are more often right than wrong. And so you think, okay, maybe, maybe I'm in the right path for doing this, but it's not really something that I intrinsically ever believed in. Maybe it's being the youngest child and having brothers and sisters who are the older siblings, as we're hearing on this call. But I think for me, actually, entrepreneurship was a big turning point. When I started my company about 3 years ago, which was something that I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. It was never something that I thought I would naturally fall into, but you can't shy away from being a leader once you start a company. You have to do everything. You're the leader and the servant constantly. And so going through that experience actually made me believe that I was capable of a lot more than I ever imagined I was, which is a big part of why I do the work that I do now, because I think it was one of the most empowering experiences that I've ever personally had.
So I call that leader by proclamation, which means you committed to an industry undertaking and leadership was non-negotiable after you do that. Brian, when did you know you were going to become a leader?
Yeah, and Masai, you and I are in very similar positions as the youngest children. And so I think our older siblings, forced us into very interesting positions where we had to like fend for ourselves. So I'm right there with you. But in my, I guess, realization actually came along with my other like youngest sibling, who's my twin. And this is a funny story. We don't have enough time for all the details, but trust me, it's a great story. But it happened.
We got a little time. I'm sure you can give us the elevator pitch version of the story.
The elevator version is it happened when we were about to be kicked out of school, out of Hampton University. So
yeah, but those details.
we were essentially protesting the Gen 6. This was back in like 2007, 2008. And we had some very difficult choices to make. And our peers were looking to us for leadership. And so we were able to, in that moment, be able to call on those who were wiser than us, who had experience, and were able to, identify the responsibility of the moment, and were able to rise to the occasion and not get kicked out of school. So, and of course, there's a lot more details to that, but that was one of the moments where we're like, look, we have a lot of work to be done.
So before I go to the next question, one thing I will just offer into the conversation, and you all may have your own take on this, and if you don't, you will. Leadership is a unique trait. Everyone doesn't have it. Everyone can't be a leader. And one thing that I've observed over the years is that the world is thirsty for it. I don't care which industry or which cause or which pursuit. People are looking for that which they want to follow. And if you have leadership traits, or you demonstrate it in any way, the world will not only call of it, but they will command of it. One of my first leadership opportunities was in college. And I was this really young, impressionable person. And I went to Morgan State University, and our women's center was populated by these most amazing progressive women. And they saw something in me, and they drew it out of me. I mean, they would say, Steve, the students are eating unhealthy on campus. There needs to be a food co-op so the students can get healthy food. And I would say, okay, never imagining that they were telling me to start the food co-op. And they said, no, you don't understand. You're supposed to do it. And I would say, okay. And I was like that Saturday Night Live character that just goes okay to everything. And so, when I look back and I will share that I think you can anticipate, is that more and more will be asked because everybody can't lead. And it's okay, because you can't have leaders if you don't have followers. But if you demonstrate the trait, and if you show some success, the world will ask more and more and more of you. It's hard to escape. It's hard to evade. So next question, what has leading demanded of you? What has leading at a young age demanded of you? Donnie, let's go with you first.
A lot of time, a lot of mental exhaustion. I'll be honest about that because we're having real talk. And I think sometimes it's not imposter syndrome, but sometimes I like second guess myself because I know in some cases I'm like Steve said, there's like a lack of leadership. So there's space and the ability to step up, but sometimes I'm questioning if that's supposed to be me, if that makes sense. And I think, we're all Black on this call. So just knowing that often we have to be twice as good, we can't make mistakes, that gets draining. The way, and as a Black woman, the way that my delivery and tone is taken at times, and people have seen me as like an angry Black woman, that weighs on me. So I always feel weird saying I'm still early 30s, so I feel weird being like, I'm tired when I know there are people who have been doing this for decades, but I do get tired. I don't know if you wanted me to be more optimistic, but I was being honest.
No, I wanted you to keep it real, and I can relate. At a very young age, I was in a setting where I was in way over my head. I was at a policy table with organizations and people who were twice my age. And I was really nervous, and I was driving to the meeting that I was nervous about going to. And as God would have it, I drove up behind a car, and on the bumper sticker of the car, it said, "Speak your mind, even if your voice trembles." And I have, since the age of 26, haven't always done it. I haven't always mastered it, but I wish I could find that bumper sticker. I would have it in my office. Although my staff doesn't need that encouragement. They are pretty vocal and opinionated about their beliefs. Brian, same question.
Yeah, I mean, Donnie, what you were saying about imposter syndrome is real. Even for me being in this space and creating something new, one of the first questions that we will always get is, well, what's your methodology? And, how did you come up with these things? And feeling that we have to justify and prove that we belong here is very taxing. But also, I love the fact that we're able to combat against those, expectations, and like redefine what it means to be in this space, and redefine how we want to operate in this space. So one of the things that I appreciate is the ability to like work with those challenges and create a new peaceful way of operating. And we could talk about some of the things that we're doing to combat some of that stuff too. But one of the things that's been a particular challenge for me is also like having a young family as well. And so for those of you who may not know, I got married extremely early. I was 24. And so we're going on our 12-year anniversary in July. And so we have two little ones, a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. And so as demanding as the work is, in my particular space, I've been tasked with creating a new office, the first of its kind in, most of the country, right? And so in doing it during a public health emergency, which brings its own challenges that we could talk about. But being responsible for staff, and then still thinking about, all these things are running through your head at night, but then also having to like put work to the side and take care of home. I have not mastered it. And so, I'm just trying to figure it out. So if y'all have some advice, I'm all ears, but that's been a really, really big challenge.
Great. Shinar.
Sorry about that. Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, that I would say is, also speaking with different, trying to engage my end users and, them knowing that we have the capacity sometimes to build, knowing that, knowing that I'm more than capable of being able to meet the needs of my client. But sometimes because you're a much more smaller company or you're on a smaller scale, they have questions of you being able to scale. And then when you do it, then it knocks the question out. It knocks the question out the park. But I would think that I would say that that's one of the biggest challenges, along with the mental exhaustion sometimes that come with it, and because the work never stops. You're always thinking about how to fine tune your service, who you need to connect back with next. It never stops. It's an ongoing scenario. So, those are some of the challenges, but we've been able to find solutions and find ways to balance it out.
Or actually, after Masai responds, I actually want to circle back and ask each of you, how do you cope? How do you relieve? But Masai?
I think being in the position that we all are now, and in the age that we're living in, you almost don't have a choice but to do racial equity work no matter where you sit. So it doesn't matter if you're, doing direct racial equity work. It doesn't matter if you're in tech. It doesn't matter if you're in finance. It's almost like you get conscripted into this work, and it's a privilege. And wherever we sit, we sort of have to do this, because if you're there, you feel this rightfully this obligation to advance representation where you are. So we don't have a choice of doing this work. But that is not easy. It's not easy knowing that we're going to be doing this work for decades. It's tiring, right? It's a privilege, but it is exhausting. This isn't work that you just the same way you can't just put down your black skin at the end of the day. You're doing this work every second that you're alive. This isn't work that you just say, oh, it's end of the day, I'm signing off, right? So that requires a lot of emotional endurance, oftentimes. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. Yeah, I think that's what I would say. I think the emotional endurance that it requires to do this work that we're all lucky to do and is absolutely necessary to do.
And I would
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. And also the expectations that come along with that. So even in this role, it's, oh, great. Now we have an Office of Racial Equity. Like, here, we want you to solve all the problems that have been plaguing our society like for centuries. And we want you to change it overnight. And it's like, well, no, actually, that's not how it works. And actually, no, like, I didn't create these problems, and I always tell myself, like, I didn't create it and I'm not going to change it overnight. And so setting those expectations has been incredibly important, but it's also, like Masai said, like that burden that we have to carry is extremely exhausting.
That's such an important point that both of you have made, and I actually should have included it in my, if you couldn't tell, I was a little distracted when I was away from the camera when Raina said go, and I came back and I'm like, oh, how did I want to open this? And got a little bit nervous and everything. But one of my intended framings was around this issue of being leaders as African Americans is you all, I don't know if young African American leaders fully appreciate the commission that you all have been given. I've been doing this work a long time. And when racial equity and disparity emerged on this current platform, I had to look backwards, and I realized that the generations before you had very different goals. Our goal was to help African Americans navigate and survive racism, but it wasn't to end it. And this heightened mandate of ending racism versus navigation and survival is very different. It's a very different burden. We had to figure out how to navigate systems, not change them. And so I know that that adds to that demand. Do any of you want to respond to that? Because I have imagined what it would be like to be your age with this new awareness that the 3 generations before you, I mean, I'm just going to say this lovingly, we're getting it wrong, even though it may have been the best that was perceived as attainable. Now this new awareness says getting it right looks different. Anybody want to respond to that?
If I could just take a stab at this, if that's okay, because I just wanted to clarify one thing. Like, I would never say that the generations that came before us got it wrong. And in fact, it's the opposite. I think we would not be here and be able to do this work if it were not for those who came before us. And so even on CORE's website, one of the first things we did was acknowledge the actual CORE, the Congress of Racial Equity, founded by James Farmer, who, like you said, focused on and dedicated his work to combating racial equity. I think we are in a position because of Farmer and so many others who built on those generations. Whether we go back, you can talk about those in the civil rights era, the long civil rights era, the abolitionist movements, like so on and so on and so on. But all that work, I see it as a continuum. So I just wanted to say, like, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for past.
Well, I appreciate you letting us off the hook a little bit. I don't mind that. And I'm going to date myself because I worked with Mr. Farmer in the early 80s. So I actually, what grew out of CORE was an auxiliary group called the Federation of Southern Land Cooperatives, which was trying to help Black farmers not lose their land. So I remember Farmer very, very well. And I do appreciate, you saying that. But I don't think that us doing the best that we can or the best that was available still negates this heightened challenge that you all face today. Did anybody else want to respond to that as well?
I just wanted to say that, so for me, as Masai said, like, everything that I've been doing since I joined my organization has been putting racial equity at the center. And coming to an organization that had been white-led for a really long time, mostly white board, mostly white staff, I felt like from day one, extra pressure was put on me, particularly by the Black community, which is not a problem, but they came to me and they were like, community members, your organization has caused harm in these ways, and we expect you to do better. And so I felt like I had that charge, and that's just been the way I've been operating since I joined this organization, is trying to fix what we did wrong in the past. And perhaps I should have let some of that burden go, but it's definitely something that I've had to carry since I've been here. And I don't know if any other people have similar experiences. I know, Brian, with your office being new, as you said, just facing challenges about your methodology and just everything, and like how this connects is something that I think about often, and that contributes to just the mental exhaustion.
Masai or Shinar, did you have any comment on the question on the point on the table about the heightened demand of having just a very different goal of actually changing systems and ending racism? Does that resonate in your work or your leadership demands in any way?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's in every demand that we look across, in our industry, running facilities, we're hit with it very hard all the time. But we have to figure out ways to, to end it, ways to navigate it. And the bureaucracy of the situation is so complex that it takes it's much needed work. So I'm going to actually second with Brian and say that I also appreciate the work that was done before our time, because I think that's why we're able to start talking about it ending, because you guys had to navigate it. And so now we can talk about ending it now because you guys have already shown that that we as Black people have the opportunity to navigate it, and not just navigate it, but we can actually own the space, to be seen as equal. So
I think the one thing I would add too is I think the urgency hasn't changed obviously at all. If anything, the urgency has even increased, and you're responding to a much bigger audience constantly. Everything that you're doing because of social media and everything else, there's just more exposure to the work. The other thing, I think the only other thing, and I'm just thinking out loud here, so this is not a fully thought out concept, but I think maybe the arena has also gotten bigger and more complex. So like I was saying earlier, if you're in tech, maybe you also have to think about like how AI plays into this. And now if you're in that space, you're having to think about how the technology that we're creating may or may not be advancing existing racial equity, like existing racial inequity. That arena wasn't there before. When we're talking about, access to capital, there's more data, there's more information, just the world that we're operating in is more complex. So that's the only thing maybe that I could think of that's adding this other intensity and pressure to the work, maybe that wasn't quite there before. But of course, the urgency is the same.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's a very profound point. And I think we're taking the fight to different and new spaces, spaces where Black people may not have had access to in the past. So yeah, that just resonated with me. One of the things that I'm thinking about is just how these cycles, these fights have been the same. And like one of the sort of passing of the torches that I always really valued and appreciated was that transitional period between when Dr. King kind of proverbially passed the torch to like Stokely Carmichael. And it happened in like this really fascinating way, like where they were marching and Dr. King got attacked and Stokely was going off in the pure Stokely fashion. And Dr. King just sat back and let Stokely like go off. And, Stokely said, if they put their hands on you again, I'm not doing none of that nonviolent stuff. Mm-hmm. And Dr. King said, Stokely, do what you have to do. And so like in that moment, you saw Stokely like, yo, like we're not talking about nonviolence anymore. We're changing the fight and we're taking it directly wherever it needs to go. And in a similar way, what we're saying now is we're tired of these structures, and we're going to take the fight wherever they need to go, whether it's fighting for capital, whether it's fighting, for these contracts, whether it's in using, language that is outdated, that needs to be changed, whether it's in reviewing these policies that are harmful. We're taking this fight wherever it needs to go.
I love that. I think it's so powerful. And I appreciate, by the way, the kind pass on history. That is lovingly received. But I think the framing, the way you all are seeing it is it's encouraging, it's inspiring. Getting the fight right is actually, part of the challenge. What I've been really heartened by just watching the environment and the leadership that is emerging is just this conversation here. The lens of clarity that you all have about what you're actually fighting, I think it is some generational platforming of perspectives and things that have happened in the past and have led us to the future. And one of the ways I frame it that way is because I have young people all the time telling me we got it wrong, and in really healthy discourse, and some of those young people are my kids who constantly say, Dad, how could you leave us this world? That's a little bit of a, that's an off-ramp conversation. So what is one thing that you've accomplished at this point in your life and career that you didn't imagine you would have accomplished? Masai, let's go with you first this time. Or did you just know right off the break you were going to be great and everything's going to be a walk in the park? I think you've already said no, but let me hear you respond to that.
No, that's a big question. I think especially for an introvert who doesn't want to talk about what she's done. No, I think being able to do this work, like you said, at the age that we're all doing it is not something I would have ever imagined. I didn't think of these professions that we're all doing as roles that we could actually step into. Like, I did not know this was a thing. I started my career as an auditor, and I actually left initially, and after doing it for a couple of years, because I felt that I could not see a clear path between auditing, a Fortune 500 company's financial statements versus the community that I was living in. And like, what is the real connection? What's the real benefit? How are these companies helping our communities? And so that was why I left audit, actually, was because I just couldn't see, I couldn't see myself in that work. I couldn't see myself doing work for decades that I didn't personally feel passionate about. So I guess the short answer is that the thing that I'm most proud of is that I'm doing work that I care about and that I actually feel is making a difference in the community. And I told myself when I left my career, left finance and audit, that I wouldn't want to do work where I didn't feel like it was making a difference. And like you said, maybe in the future, it'll turn out we're all getting it wrong, but we're doing our best now and we're actually trying to make a difference. And I can't imagine something more worthwhile than that.
So as you all can see, my son is just back from school and crashing. So
Hey, what's up, son? What's up? Hey.
I'll probably have to turn my video off in a second.
No, he can just add the next generation of leadership comments into the conversation. Brian, you want to take a stab at that question?
Sure. What was the question again?
Let
me just say,
what is one thing that you've accomplished in your leadership journey that you never thought you would have accomplished this early in life? I mean, you got a lot of answers to that. I know some of them, but I'm gonna let you choose your own.
Yeah, I don't know. I think being able to create a pipeline for young people that are interested in this work. I think now, we are creating positions where people can like come and work in a space dedicated to fighting for racial equity. And being able to give people those opportunities is really important to me. And if I would add one other one, it would be, now my daughter and my son, they talk about the Office of Racial Equity. And so they'll talk about CORE, and that means the world to me.
That's powerful. Donnie? And then you, Shinar.
For me, it's very similar to what Brian said. I'm not originally from DC, I'm from Pittsburgh. And I think just living outside the city, you hear a lot about DC and how it's intimidating and it's hard to like thrive here. And I feel like I've been able to do that because I intentionally built a network of like-minded people, predominantly Black women, but also Black men like Brian. And we're there for each other, we support each other, we go through a lot of the same things. And I feel like just having that community is something that I'm really proud of, and that I've helped to like intentionally build for myself, as well as for new people who are coming after me. So that's it for me.
Shinar.
Yeah, no, I would second what everyone is saying. I think that one of the greatest achievements would be just the fact that we really trained and ended up hiring, over 100 residents in the city. I think that's very impactful to have been able to do at a very young age and giving folks opportunities. So, and we're so thankful to CNHED for allowing us to assist us with getting on Georgetown's campus to be able to do that work. But I think that was a great accomplishment.
Those are great answers. I want to see if we have questions. There is one in there. I mean, I have more questions, but I want to open up and see if the audience wants to ask questions of you. One question that is in the chat that I was going to ask anyway is, and I don't want to just limit it, I mean, it can't limit it to CNHED, but I want to say, what can organizations and other entities that are supposed to help, what can they do to help you in your leadership journey? What can and should the ecosystem be doing to intentionally help support and grow and develop, not just you, but others like you who either aspire to it, or as some of you said in your earlier comments, find themselves in it. Because I think both are very different types of supports. Those who aspire to it have certain needs, and those who find themselves in it, whether they aspire to it or not. Any responses to that?
I'll just share a couple of thoughts about that. I think the conversation earlier about how demanding and tiring this work is, and the fact that we're all hopefully want to be in it for as many decades as it takes to do this work. And hopefully it's not long, right? Hopefully we can all be out of this work because we've addressed all these issues and we've eliminated all the problems. But more than likely, we're all going to be doing this work for a long time. So I think organizations like CNHED and others that are in this space have to think intentionally about how to care for leaders that are in this space and acknowledge the effort and the emotional toll of this, and make it easier to have these jobs, right? Like that's where incentives, salary, benefits all matter. And so that people who are good at this can take these jobs as opposed to going into industry or going elsewhere where the salary is higher. But I think we also have an opportunity to do work differently. And because we're already doing this hard work of challenging massive inequities in society, maybe we can take the lead in also rethinking how we do work. How do you show up at work? What is, you've been saying, why do we take it for granted that a 5-day work is how it's been? Only because we've done it that way for the past few decades. But that the things that we take for granted about how work is structured, I think organizations like this have the opportunity to challenge that and should think about that, because we're about human beings, right? And we're not about creating widgets. And so how do we think about taking care of human beings, leaders like us, and also those who come after?
I just want to say, I think that is really huge. Obviously, as the CEO of an organization that is supposed to care about this stuff, I can tell you that it's really challenging to get that right. I think the salary, the benefits, the staff development is the easy part. One thing I would encourage you all, and I'm really assertive at CNHED as best I can be about that, and I know other leaders in my position who are as well, but one of the things that I would throw into the conversation is I think reward systems change between generations. And I think that, as you said, Masai, looking at workplace conditions and arrangements and other things. But if you work for an old guy like me, we need some help understanding how the reward system may be different. And I've got some really deep personal experience about getting it wrong, because I thought the easy thing is more money, better benefits, staff development, liberal time off, and all those things. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a voice at the table. Sometimes it's voice being respected. Sometimes it's licensing risk and other things that make up in a reward system. So I would say, we not knowing the full impact of these new demands with these new mandates and missions, I think that systems need to understand how a reward system might look different to you all. Because I think people think they're getting it right, but they may not be touching. And I know I'm guilty of it. I'm constantly challenged by trying to get it right for the people who work at CNHED. And I think I do great at some things, and I still think I need work and improvement in others. But I think having that open awareness is really important. Did anybody else want to respond to that? Donnie, go ahead.
I wrote down a couple of thoughts because I had some time and I didn't want to forget them. So for people who are currently on your staff, definitely make sure that you have a professional development budget, not just like an organizational one, but like individual professional development budget. So people know how much is available and what they can use to grow their skills and their interest. I think if you're asking Black staff to do the bulk of the racial equity work, then they should be getting paid more, or that should be compensated, maybe through stipends. I don't know what that looks like, but it shouldn't be not compensated. I think on kind of along the lines of what Steve was just talking about, I think what goes into that also is allowing people the space to say no. Particularly in the nonprofit industry, we all get tasked with doing lots of different things, and it does become a lot. So we've tried, at least in my organization, to reprioritize and not do everything, because we can't do everything well. So being able to step back and say, we can't do this, and having the space to be able to do that and have it be respected is important. And then I heard Brian mention Hampton and Steve mention Morgan State. And so I just want to put a pitch for like starting or building a pipeline from HBCUs. Like, that's really important to me. I think often the fellowship and internship programs I've seen that are unpaid end up building the same pipeline of white people with wealth who have the ability to, you know, ask their parents to, maybe I shouldn't go into all that, but like the people who can't take unpaid internships and fellowships often are Black and brown people. So like creating a paid pipeline through HBCUs is something I would recommend too.
Great. Question in the chat. It says, how do you, I want to get this right. You're in different fields of work. However, how do you incorporate advocacy for communities in the fields that you lead in? Responses, did everybody get the framing for that? I think they are looking at your different organizations and want to know how you platform advocacy in the work that you do.
One of the ways that I incorporate advocacy into the work that we do is actually multifaceted. So do it different ways. The first way is through emotion. We have emotional intelligence workshops every other weekend. I understand my demographic very much, being as though that I come from that same demographic. So I understand that what some of us may deem or see as common sense may not be common sense to another person, because if they never had that experience or that balance or that foundation from a home level. So we train on emotional intelligence. We also ensure that advocacy of assisting people like financial literacy, different things that we incorporate these things into our staff, so that our staff is empowered to be able to be leaders in their communities as well.
Anyone else?
I think for my research, I do a good job of just incorporating community lens. I always think about, for my Black Workers Matter paper, I was meeting with someone and they were like, please don't just talk about the bad things and the racial inequities, but please include a section on Black resistance. And so that's something that always stood out to me. And I think through our budget work at my organization, since we're not a direct service provider, we tend to rely on partners like Fair Budget Coalition, which has a constituent program, and CNHED also, to get more community voices to inform our budget priorities, but that's definitely an area where we can improve.
So let me just check chat. I kind of want to at least start the wind down. We've got a couple of minutes left. And we talked about the challenges, talked about, the journey, the expected, the unexpected. But I really kind of want to at least get this question in, even if we have time to respond to others. I want to ask each of you, despite what you didn't expect as you journeyed, despite your uncertainty about being a leader or your certainty about being a leader, as you look at the world as it exists, your place in it as you are, what are you hopeful about? Given everything you see, everything you've done, everything you know, as young African-American leaders in your different places, what are you hopeful about? Donnie. I just looked at my screen. I just went for who was close.
It's so cliche, but I feel like similar to what Brian was saying about your generation, Steve, I see that in like the generation right now that's in high school and college. They're even pushing my generation to do more and to do better. So I'm really hopeful and just optimistic about what all the things that they're going to accomplish going forward. And yeah, I think that's my answer.
Yeah, I second what Donnie said. And this generational thing is so acute because yeah, even the generation right after us is motivated differently than we are. So we're already seeing that. But the thing that makes me feel hopeful, and this is going to be strange to say, but how much things have changed during COVID about everything. Like the fact that when the moment called for it almost at the drop of a dime, we're able to change education. We're able to change the way we work, the way we entertain ourselves, the way we socialize in unthinkable ways. And yes, it was motivated by something terrible, but the fact that like as a society, we had that in us was not something I would have ever thought was possible. So it gives me hope that like, if we could change all those things in a matter of a couple of months, think of what's possible if we just found the willpower and the right motivation. So that's actually been inspiring for me, and it gives me hope that we can do a lot more than we're currently doing.
Shannara, Brian?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that I'm very hopeful that DC will continue to have these conversations on race. That's not something that I take lightly because, I started in DC government in 2014, and nobody was having conversations on race. Like that's not something that the government was spearheading. And so for me to see that now there are these offices is really something that I'm hopeful for.
Shannara?
Yeah, my hope is very ambitious, but I really hope that we can remove all the bureaucracy that exists around all of our racial and inequalities as it relates to doing business with authority businesses. And really having the same platform that as our counterparts who have corporations, that may not necessarily be doing better business or better offering better services. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, or from our counterparts, like we won a contract from a larger competitor of ours who's about maybe 10 times our size, and we've been doing much more better services than that company. And so, just really being able to get through that bureaucracy is really it really is a game changer. So, that's what I'm hopeful for.
So we are at time. I want to thank you, each of you, for sharing yourselves with us today, and thank the audience for coming out. Sorry about my shaky startup. I really was distracted. Something happened in the house and kind of lost my way for a second. But it actually leads me to the point that I want to tell you that I observed in your dialogue. I teach leadership in another universe of existence, and there are two things about leadership that I think are often missed. One of them is a relationship to power. It's the opposite as it appears. The more you give it away, the more you have it. But the other one, which you all demonstrated today, is about vulnerability. Too often leaders think that they have to have this S on their chest, that they have all the answers. And I always jokingly say, I have a small S on my chest. It's for Steve. It's not for Superman. And you all demonstrated great vulnerability. When you are comfortable with that, others clamor to help you and to support you and to lift you up. And each of you in your conversation, in addition to your great insights, and they were great and they were incisive, you also each demonstrated some vulnerability. And to me, that is such an essential quality. It's how you get people to rally around you and to feel valued and so forth. So I want to thank you all for kicking off our inaugural Black Futures Month. I'll wait to see what kind of feedback we get to see. Is this the way of the future? I have a feeling that it will be. But thank you for being with us today and sharing with our audience your insights. Thank you all so very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.